From that moment on, she loathed Ethan Sterling, the men she had married. It was also then that Ethan realized the person Victoria Vance had always loved was her younger stepbrother, Julian. However, their budding feelings were nipped in the bud by Victoria's parents. To prevent this scandalous, taboo love, they forced Victoria to marry Ethan Sterling, the man who had adored her since childhood. She and he hated each other for a full 10 years. She hoped to be rid of him at every moment. So, when the chandelier fell, she pushed Ethan away without hesitation, but she herself fell into a pool of blood. Before her death, she uttered her last words, "Ethan, consider it my plea in exchange for my life. If there is an afterlife, don't love me, and don't marry me. Just grant me my wish." Therefore, Ethan Sterling spent his entire remaining life investing billions to build a time machine. When he opened his eyes again, he was back on the first day he married Victoria Vance. Clearly, it was their wedding night, but Victoria was dead drunk. She drank only because her parents had forced her to marry a man she didn't love, while the man she truly loved was currently on a blind date with someone else. Her face was flushed, and her hazy eyes seemed covered in a layer of mist. She constantly rubbed her face against Ethan's hand, her voice soaked in alcohol, carrying a slightly hoarse intoxication. "Julian, don't go on a blind date with someone else. Your sister can't live without you. If you were with someone else, your sister would really go crazy." Every word of truth, spoken only when she was drunk, was like a sharp knife stirring Ethan's heart into a complete mess. Falling in love with Victoria Vance had been an all-too-easy thing. He and Victoria were childhood sweethearts, growing up together. She would coax the truant boy home, she would brave the wind and snow to buy sweet cakes for him when he was beaten up and said he wanted to eat them, she would protect him from tall, strong kidnappers at the cost of breaking 2 ribs. But later, he realized that her care for him was not love. It was only because of their family's friendship, only because she was proper, only because she was an exceptionally good person. Her feelings for Julian Vance, that was love. She and Julian were not related by blood. When Julian was 7 years old, his mother married Victoria's father, forming a family of 4. So, from childhood to adulthood, although Victoria doted on Julian, Ethan only considered it the affection of a sister for her younger brother. But later, he realized that Victoria would be jealous because her younger brother spoke a few extra words to other girls, she would be flustered and unable to sleep all night after seeing him with his shirt unbuttoned, she would hug him and kiss him intimately in secret. Unfortunately, he knew it too late. One marriage killed Julian, ruined Victoria, and filled the rest of Ethan's life with bitterness. He still remembered that before turning on the time machine, the researcher said that only by fulfilling Victoria's 3 regrets could the ending for everyone be changed. Ethan's slender fingers slowly stroked Victoria's face, recalling the 3 regrets she had written in her diary, regretting marrying Ethan Sterling, regretting not resisting her parents with all her might, regretting not saving Julian. He took a deep breath and murmured softly, "Victoria, this time, your wish will be fulfilled." Late at night, the printer whirred. Ethan signed the divorce agreement and handed it to Victoria, gently deceiving her by mimicking Julian's voice. "Sign it. If you sign it, I won't go on a blind date." She almost snatched the pen and signed her name without hesitation. Ethan smiled, a smile that made his heart ache. Sure enough, she loved Julian to the bone, she would do anything he said. He raised his hand to wipe away the tears from the corner of his eyes. "You signed it without even looking. Aren't you afraid I'm deceiving you?" Victoria reacted particularly slowly, and only after a long time did she raise her hand to caress his face, her eyes full of deep affection for her lover. "As long as you are willing to stay by my side, I can give you anything." All men are unable to resist these words, but unfortunately, she was saying them to Julian Vance. Ethan stared at her for a long time, his eyes red for a long, long time. The next morning, he handed the agreement to his lawyer, his voice calm. "Both parties have signed the divorce agreement. Please start the divorce proceedings for me." The lawyer hesitated. "Sir, divorcing on the first day of marriage? Shouldn't you reconsider?" "No need to reconsider," he answered decisively. "I must get this divorce." Just then, a clear voice came from behind. "Get a divorce from whom?" Ethan's body stiffened, and he turned around sharply, just in time to see Victoria coming downstairs, having woken up from her hangover. He quickly signaled the divorce lawyer to leave, and only after the lawyer left did he turn around and lie. "It's nothing. You misheard. I was just consulting the lawyer about property. His words were full of loopholes, but Victoria didn't ask further simply because she didn't care about him at all. At this time, Julian hadn't committed suicide yet. Therefore, after the marriage, Victoria's attitude towards Ethan was only indifferent, not hateful. She hummed softly, pressing her temples with a hint of fatigue. Sorry, I was so happy at the wedding last night that I drank too much. I'll make up a wedding night for you later. Happy. Ethan's eyes reddened uncontrollably again. Victoria, are you really happy? Clearly, in the 10 years I was married to you, you would get drunk every day, and every time you would hug me and call out Julian's name. You were heartbroken and in agonizing pain. Your love for Julian was too intense. That feeling of unrequited love and lifelong regret was like a net, trapping you and trapping my entire life as well. Just as he was about to speak, the butler walked up and said respectfully, Sir, Madam, the gifts and car needed to visit the Sterling family elders are all ready. Victoria nodded and then extended her hand to Ethan, her dark eyes devoid of any emotion. Let's go. He tightened his hand at his side and then took her palm. Warmth instantly spread throughout Ethan's body from their joined hands but couldn't warm his cold heart no matter what. On the way, the red lights were frequent, and the black Maybach stopped and started. During a stop at a red light, Ethan was about to close his eyes for a nap when he suddenly heard a ding sound from the phone next to him. He subconsciously looked over and saw Victoria's slender fingers swiping across the lit screen. Her expression gradually turned somber, eventually turning into a dark, turbulent pool. Suddenly, she turned her phone face down on her lap and turned to look at him. Ethan, there's an emergency at the company. I'm afraid I can't accompany you back to the Sterling family today. I'll visit Mom and Dad to apologize another day. Without waiting for him to respond, she had already pushed the door open and got out of the car, her back view resolute. Ethan lowered his eyes and lit up his own phone. On the screen, Julian's social media feed was prominently displayed in a 9-grid collage. He and his blind date partner were smiling brightly in an amusement park. The photo in the center, where they were holding hands and looking at each other, was sickeningly sweet. No woman wants the person she likes to smile so sweetly at another woman, let alone Victoria Vance. So, there was no emergency at the company. This was the real reason she was in such a hurry to leave. Outside the Sterling family villa, Ethan's parents had been waiting for a long time. Seeing their son get out of the car alone, the two elders were first stunned, then hesitated to speak. Ethan's mother, unwilling to give up, looked into the car behind Ethan. When she saw that there was really no one inside, she opened her mouth as if to say something but swallowed the words in her throat after meeting her son's calm eyes. It wasn't until the dinner table that Ethan spoke up. Dad, Mom, I'm planning to divorce Victoria. As soon as the words were spoken, the entire dining table fell into a deathly silence. Ethan's father frowned. Why suddenly? Is everything all right? Ethan's mother was even more anxious. Yes, Ethan, is there anything that can't be resolved? You like Victoria very much, and you've only been married for a day. How can you? Her voice trailed off because Ethan had already raised his eyes, his reddened eyes filled with tears. Mom and Dad, I'm not happy with her. I want a divorce. Let her go, and let myself go. Please grant my wish. Support my decision. His voice was soft, but the more he spoke, the redder his eyes became, as if he had suffered a great injustice. His parents didn't know what had happened, but seeing their beloved son crying like this, their hearts instantly softened. They quickly put down their chopsticks and rushed over to hug their son, no longer pressing for answers, simply saying, okay, Mom and Dad agree. Mom and Dad agree to everything. If you want a divorce, then get a divorce. Mom and Dad fully support you. Ethan leaned into his parents' arms, tears flowing uncontrollably. His parents truly loved him. In his previous life, his marriage was unhappy, and his parents were worried about him every day, their hair turning white in just a few years. This time, he would never let his parents worry about him again. Mom and Dad, after I get divorced, let's move abroad and settle down, Ethan said, choking back sobs. His parents exchanged a look, then nodded. Okay. Wherever you want to go, Mom and Dad will go with you. Ethan wiped away his tears and finally smiled. This time, he wouldn't let Julian commit suicide, wouldn't let Victoria lose her love forever, wouldn't let his parents frown, and wouldn't let himself suffer for the rest of his life. He would give everyone a good ending. In the days that followed, the empty marital home did not welcome its mistress back. However, Ethan saw Victoria's figure in Julian's social media posts every day. In the top compartment of the Ferris wheel, Victoria patiently held Julian in her arms. By the window of a romantic restaurant, Victoria thoughtfully peeled shrimp for him. Under the seaside fireworks, Victoria protectively covered his ears with her hands. In every photo, Victoria's eyes as she looked at Julian were filled with a rich, inseparable affection. Julian captioned it, "Having a sister who's a total brother-obsessed maniac is so awesome." A friend teased below, "Your sister is so beautiful and treats you so well. How are you ever going to like a blind date?" Julian replied with a grin, "If I don't like them, I don't like them. My sister insisted on not letting me be with her and even said she would take care of me for the rest of my life. I can't help it. I can only say goodbye to her." Ethan swallowed the bitterness in his heart and silently turned off his phone. These past few days, while Victoria was away, Ethan packed most of his luggage while also thinking about how to fulfill Victoria's second regret, getting her parents to agree to her being with Julian. Mrs. Vance was Julian's biological mother, so naturally, the difficulty wasn't great. The most difficult one was Mr. Robert Vance. He was the proper head of the Vance family, and Victoria was his most satisfied successor. He had taught her for many years to cultivate such a heavenly chosen daughter, and he would never allow her to make any mistakes. Although Victoria and Julian were not biological siblings, they were on the same household registration, after all. Therefore, in his previous life, after learning that they had secretly developed feelings for each other, Robert Vance was furious and forcibly separated them, making Victoria marry Ethan. Just as Ethan was thinking about how to persuade Robert Vance, Victoria returned. She was wearing a well-tailored dress and held a suit in her hand, handing it to Ethan. "There's a family banquet tonight. Come with me." Ethan paused for a moment, then took the suit. "Okay." He lowered his eyes, looking very well behaved, not asking at all where she had gone for the past few days, not mentioning consummating their marriage, nor accompanying him back to the Sterling family. Victoria looked at him, then took out a gift box from her pocket and handed it to him. "I saw it at an auction. I bought it for you." Ethan opened the gift box and found a pair of cufflinks inside. Recently, the news that Victoria had spent $100 million to bid for a limited edition royal ring had spread like wildfire in the circle, and everyone thought she was giving it to her husband. But he, her husband, was only worthy of the cufflinks that came with the jewelry set. But he said nothing, only smiled as he put on the cufflinks and said softly, "It's beautiful." "Thank you." Victoria looked at him, a complex emotion flashed in her eyes, but it quickly returned to calm. In the evening, the two went to the family banquet together. At the banquet, everyone praised them as a perfect match, teasing the newlywed couple. "Victoria and Ethan are such a good fit. I've watched these two grow up since they were little, and they finally came together. I think it won't be long before they have a little baby, right? The child they have will definitely be beautiful." Victoria clearly didn't want to deal with this occasion and made an excuse to leave. "I'm going to make a call." Ethan was left standing there dealing with everyone's teasing alone. Finally finished dealing with everyone, Ethan breathed a sigh of relief and was about to leave when a familiar voice came from behind. "Brother-in-law, long time no see. Haven't said congratulations on your wedding yet." Ethan turned around and saw Julian standing behind him in a moon-white formal suit, tall and straight, and on his hand was the limited edition royal ring. Ethan's face stiffened for a few seconds but quickly returned to calm, and he raised a smile. "Julian, long time no see. Your ring is very nice." Julian touched the ring on his hand with a smile, his tone carrying a hint of pride. "Really? My sister gave it to me. It's too expensive. I told her not to and to give it to you, but she said that only I deserve it." As he spoke, he scrutinized Ethan's expression, seemingly wanting to see a trace of jealousy or disappointment on his face. But Ethan remained calm, even smiling and praising, "It really suits you." Julian was momentarily speechless, unsure of how to continue provoking. He had thought that Ethan would be angry, jealous, or even argue with him, but Ethan's reaction left him with no way to start. Just as Ethan was about to leave, Julian suddenly grabbed his hand, his tone carrying a hint of faint apology. "Brother-in-law, I went on a blind date the day you and my sister got married and didn't have time to give you a gift. I'll make it up to you today." Ethan wanted to say it wasn't necessary, but Julian exclaimed in a self-directed manner, "Ah, brother-in-law, don't push me." Then, he suddenly jumped into the pool. Before Ethan could react, Victoria heard the noise and ran over. When she saw Julian struggling in the water, her face turned pale instantly, and she frantically called out Julian's name, then jumped in without hesitation. Because she was too anxious, when she entered the water, she pushed Ethan, who was standing beside the pool, hard. He lost his balance and staggered, his forehead hitting heavily on the stone edge of the pool, and blood flowed instantly. Immediately afterwards, Julian was rescued. He was soaking wet, looking pitifully at Victoria, his voice carrying a hint of grievance. "Sister, I don't know what made brother-in-law angry. He clearly knew I couldn't swim, and he pushed me down." Ethan, clutching his bleeding forehead, felt incredulous. "I didn't." But Victoria gave him a cold look. Just one look, and he felt chilled to the bone. Just as he was about to speak, Julian's voice exclaimed again. "Sister, the ring you gave me is gone. It must have fallen into the pool." "No, I have to find it." Victoria quickly stopped him, her tone carrying a hint of heartache. "Forget it, I'll buy you a new one later. I'll send you to the hospital now." Julian shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "No, it's the one you gave me. I have to find it." After speaking, he made a gesture to jump in again. Victoria looked at the soaking wet Julian and then at Ethan not far away. Instantly filled with anger, she said coldly, "Whoever lost it goes down to get it." Having said that, she gave the bodyguard a look. The bodyguard immediately understood, stepped forward, grabbed Ethan's arm, and threw him into the pool with a plop. Water splashed everywhere, and a chorus of exclamations arose around them. "What is Victoria doing? That's her new husband. I heard that Ethan accidentally dropped the ring she gave her younger brother into the pool, so she wants him to find it back. I've long heard that Victoria dotes on that stepbrother as if he were a treasure. I didn't believe it before, but now I finally do." Ethan's body suddenly sank. The icy pool water instantly engulfed him, rushing in from all directions like countless invisible hands pulling at his limbs and dragging him into the abyss. It was autumn, and he was wearing a thin suit. The icy pool water made him shiver all over. He struggled to climb out, but the bodyguard pushed him back down again. "No, don't." Ethan struggled desperately, but his cries for help were all swallowed by the pool water. Miss Vance said that you can only come ashore when you find the ring." Ethan vaguely watched Victoria leave with Julian in her arms, a pang of sorrow in his heart. He could only sink down, searching again and again. It took him a full 2 hours to finally find the ring. When he climbed ashore soaking wet, he was already frozen blue and purple. The hand holding the ring trembled incessantly. He collapsed on the shore, gasping for breath like a fish on the verge of death. The family banquet had already dispersed, everyone had left. He could only clutch the ring, staggering out of the villa. He was halfway out when he suddenly realized he hadn't taken his phone. He had to return along the slope. But after only a few steps, he saw flames soaring into the sky not far away. In an instant, his mind exploded. How could he have forgotten about this? In his previous life, the Vance family's old house had caught fire at this time. Robert Vance had drunk too much and was sleeping alone in his study. He was almost burned to death inside. Although he was rescued later, he suffered third-degree burns, and his later life was filled with pain. Thinking of this, Ethan immediately dialed the emergency number and then rushed into the fire without hesitation. The scorching flames darted around, searing vivid blisters onto Ethan's exposed skin. Ground-level tongues of fire licked at the skin on his calves, leaving trails of fire marks. The stinging pain made Ethan's vision go black, but he couldn't care less. He rushed straight toward Robert Vance's study. As expected, when he pushed open the door, he saw Robert Vance collapsed inside. He called out "Dad" several times. When he couldn't wake him, he quickly dragged him out. Just as they were about to reach the door, a burning rack fell over. He quickly pushed Robert Vance to safety. In an instant, Robert was safe, but Ethan was knocked unconscious by the burning rack with a loud bang. He felt a burning pain on his back, his vision went black, and he completely passed out. When Ethan woke up again, he found himself lying in a hospital. The nurse was applying medicine to him. Seeing him wake up, she excitedly said, "You're finally awake. Your back is so severely injured, you'll probably have scars for the rest of your life." Ethan didn't bother to listen to her about how badly he was injured. He just kept asking about Robert Vance's whereabouts. After learning which ward he was in, he quickly got out of bed and ran out. But as soon as he arrived at the door, he saw a harmonious and joyful scene inside. Mrs. Vance was holding Julian's hand with a smile on her face. "This time we really have to thank our Julian. Otherwise, your father would have been much more seriously injured. He's getting old and can't handle too much." Julian smiled with a hint of embarrassment on his face. "Mom, it's all what I should do." Victoria was also beside him, her tone grateful but with a hint of worry. "Julian, you should have called me. How could you rush in there alone? It was so dangerous. What if something had happened?" "Sister, I couldn't think of anything else. My only thought at the time was that I couldn't let Dad get hurt. It's okay, don't worry. Dad and I are both fine." Listening to Julian's voice, everyone couldn't help but smile slightly, including Robert Vance, who was usually stern and authoritative. Ever since Robert found out that Victoria and Julian had feelings for each other, he had been giving Julian the cold shoulder. But this time, the look in his eyes towards Julian was gentler, with less displeasure and more gratitude. Ethan stood at the door of the ward, his heart slightly shaken. He didn't know why Julian would take his credit, claiming that he was the one who saved Robert Vance. But perhaps this was the best outcome. Letting Robert change his view of Julian might lead to him accepting him and Victoria. So, he didn't expose Julian's lie but silently left. For the next few days, Ethan lay in his own ward. No one came to see him, and he didn't go out. Until this day, Victoria finally remembered him, her husband, and called him for the first time since their marriage. At that moment, Ethan was applying medicine to himself in front of the mirror, the wound on his back burning with pain, and his fingers were trembling. The nurse said that the scars were permanent and could never be removed. He struggled to swipe the answer button, and the next second, he heard Victoria's voice, as cold as ice. "Where are you? Do you know that the old house caught fire and Dad is in the hospital? As a son-in-law, you're not even willing to visit him once. Are you still angry about the last time I punished you? Even at a time like this?" Ethan held the phone, his fingers trembling slightly. "No, I've been recently." Before he could finish speaking, Julian's voice came from the other end of the phone. "Sister, don't ask brother-in-law to come. It's enough for me to be with Dad." Julian's voice was gentle but with a hint of faint mockery. Brother-in-law was angry last time. He must be letting off some steam. Let him have some fun outside. Victoria's breathing became rapid, seemingly angered by Julian's words. She didn't wait for Ethan to say anything else and hung up the phone directly. Ethan held the phone, stunned for a few seconds, then smiled bitterly. He was used to such neglect, but every time, his heart still ached. A week later, Ethan was finally discharged from the hospital. Robert Vance was less injured than him, only inhaling some smoke, and left the hospital early. So the first thing Ethan did after being discharged from the hospital was not to return to the Vance family but to find Mr. Vance. He kneeled on the ground, his voice with a hint of pleading. "Dad, please grant Julian and Victoria your blessing." As soon as these words came out, Robert Vance was stunned, his eyes filled with shock. He paused for a full 3 or 4 seconds before belatedly helping him up, saying in disbelief, "Ethan, you also know about them." Ethan smiled bitterly. "Yes, Dad. Please grant them your blessing. They're truly in love." Robert Vance frowned. "Ethan, you are Victoria's husband. How can you let me agree to them being together? They're siblings. This is impossible." Ethan looked at Robert. Although his tone was firm, he still saw a hint of loosening. The fact that Julian supposedly saved him at the risk of his own life obviously carried weight in his heart. He pressed his advantage, his voice with a hint of urgency. "Dad, I want to tell you something you might not believe, but it's true. Actually, I came back in a time machine." Robert Vance was stunned, his eyes filled with disbelief. A time machine? Ethan, what nonsense are you talking about? Ethan took a deep breath and shook his head. I'm not talking nonsense. I've actually lived a lifetime. In my previous life, you broke up Victoria and Julian, forcing her to marry me. Julian couldn't accept it and committed suicide. Not long after our marriage, Victoria was immersed in his death and couldn't get out, and eventually followed him. Robert Vance's face changed, clearly unable to accept such an unbelievable claim. Ethan anticipated his reaction and continued. If you don't believe me, I can prove it. In 10 minutes, the North Bridge in the city will collapse. If you don't believe me, wait and see if you'll see it on the news. Robert looked at him, half believing and half doubting, but finally nodded. The two sat in the living room waiting in silence. 10 minutes later, the news indeed began to report the sudden collapse of the North Bridge. Robert Vance's face instantly changed, his eyes filled with shock. He looked at Ethan, his voice trembling slightly. How is this possible? Ethan seized the opportunity and pleaded again. Dad, I'm not lying. Although they are siblings now, just move Julian's household registration out. Please agree. They are truly in love. Victoria is your most desired heir, you definitely don't want her to end up dying young. Robert Vance's mind was in chaos, clearly unable to accept everything immediately. After an unknown amount of time, he waved his hand, his voice trembling slightly. Ethan, go back for now. This matter. I need to think about it. Ethan knew that Robert's resolve had loosened considerably. He didn't press him further, simply nodded, and got up to leave. Back home, Victoria still hadn't returned. Ethan sat alone by the window, looking at the stars outside. The night breeze was cool, messing up his hair, but he felt much more relaxed. He thought, Victoria, your second regret should be fulfilled soon too. The next day, he woke up early. Just as he was thinking about continuing to pack his luggage, the door suddenly opened. Victoria walked in with a cold face, her tone carrying a hint of command. Change clothes. We're going on a date. Ethan was stunned, completely unable to react. Date? Why are you suddenly? Victoria impatiently interrupted him. Don't ask so many questions. Change clothes. Just then, Ethan's phone made a sound. He looked down and saw a text message from Robert Vance. Ethan, I've been thinking all night. The time machine thing is just too ridiculous. How about this? You spend more time with Victoria. You've both been growing up in front of me since you were little. She's not completely devoid of feelings for you. I've already forced her back. You guys go on more dates these few days. If it still doesn't work, I'll let go. I won't interfere with you young people's affairs. Ethan looked at the text message, his heart filled with complicated feelings. Before he could recover, Victoria had already spoken coldly. I've already come back to date you. Are you still going to complain to Dad? Ethan opened his mouth, wanting to explain, but Victoria didn't give him a chance at all. She grabbed his wrist and dragged him directly into the car. Throughout the entire day's date, Victoria's face never showed a single expression. She accompanied Ethan to the mall, watched a movie, and even went to the amusement park, but her eyes were always cold, as if the person beside her was not her husband but an enemy. Ethan followed behind her, feeling like something was pressing down on his heart, making it hard to breathe. In the evening, they sat in a high-end couples restaurant. The candlelight flickered, the music was soft, but the atmosphere was as cold as ice. Victoria didn't eat a single bite of food, only kept drinking. Ethan finally couldn't help but advise, don't drink anymore. It's bad for your health. Victoria put down her wine glass and looked at him coldly. Grandpa wants me to consummate our marriage tonight, but I don't want to. Once I'm drunk, I won't have this trouble. Ethan's heart sank, and his fingers clenched unconsciously. He lowered his head, his voice tinged with bitterness. I didn't force you. Victoria scoffed, her tone laced with mockery. I thought you were being so well-behaved and understanding these past few days, and I even felt a little guilty towards you. Now it seems you were just pretending, deliberately not showing it in front of me, but then you went and complained to my dad that I wasn't spending time with you. Is that it? Ethan felt a stabbing pain in his chest, as if he had been stabbed by a knife. Ethan Sterling, the Ethan I knew before wasn't like this. Did you change, or did I never really know you? Ethan lowered his head. He didn't answer. He just stayed with her silently until she was dead drunk. After the meal, Victoria was so drunk she could barely stand. Ethan helped her back home and struggled to get her onto the bed. He was about to turn and leave when he lost his balance and fell on top of her. Their lips met, and Ethan froze. But Victoria seemed to have found an outlet and kissed him passionately. Julian. I like you. I like you so much. Her voice was low and husky, tinged with drunkenness. Ethan's heart felt like it was being squeezed tightly, the pain almost making it hard to breathe. Ah. Victoria, you've got the wrong person. I'm not Julian. He was about to push her away when a loud crash bang came from the doorway. Ethan looked up and saw Julian standing outside the door, his face pale, his eyes filled with shock and pain. Julian, let me explain. Before Ethan could finish speaking, Julian had already turned and run away. He wanted to chase after him, but Victoria held him tightly, unable to move. Her strength was astonishing. Ethan struggled for a long time before finally breaking free from her embrace. When he chased after him, Julian had already disappeared. He felt like a stone was weighing on his heart, and he didn't know what kind of storm tomorrow would bring. But what he didn't expect was that the storm would come so quickly. In the middle of the night, Victoria's phone suddenly rang. She answered the phone, and after hearing what the person on the other end said, her face instantly turned pale. After hanging up, she suddenly sat up in bed, her voice trembling. Julian committed suicide. He saw us kissing. Ethan's mind went boom, as if struck by lightning. Suicide? How could this be? He clearly remembered that Julian's suicide didn't happen at this time in his previous life. Why was it earlier? Victoria's drunkenness instantly dissipated. She glared at Ethan, her eyes filled with anger and pain. Are you satisfied now? Did you see this coming all along? Did you do it on purpose? Ethan opened his mouth, wanting to explain, but Victoria wouldn't listen. She grabbed her car keys and rushed out the door, not even bothering to put on a coat. When Ethan chased after her, she was about to start the car. He quickly rushed over and grabbed the car window. I want to go too. Victoria looked at him coldly. What are you going to do? Hurt Julian again? Did you figure out early on that I liked Julian, so you went and complained to my dad, and then you made sure he saw me kissing you? Ethan, if anything happens to Julian, I will hate you forever. Ethan's heart felt like something was squeezing it tightly, the pain almost making it hard to breathe. He gritted his teeth and said word by word, Victoria, I have no malice towards him. The only reason I insist on going is because Julian's suicide this time will lead to massive blood loss, and the blood bank will be short. My blood type is the same as his. I can save him. In his previous life, Julian died on the operating table because he didn't get a blood source in time. Victoria wouldn't listen and started the car directly. Ethan panicked and stood in front of the car. Victoria couldn't brake in time, and the car crashed into him with a loud bang. He was sent flying and crashed heavily to the ground. Victoria quickly got out of the car and shouted in shock, "Are you crazy?" Amidst a pool of blood, Ethan staggered to his feet and stubbornly said, "Take me there." Victoria finally relented. She rushed Ethan to the hospital and was surprised to find that he was right. Julian was indeed hemorrhaging badly, and the blood bank was indeed running low. Ethan immediately stepped forward and said to the nurse, "My blood type is the same as his. I'll donate." The nurse looked at his disheveled appearance and asked in shock, "Were you just in a car accident? You're too weak. You can't donate blood." Ethan insisted, "I can. Take my blood." The nurse couldn't dissuade him and had no choice but to start drawing blood. Ethan's face grew paler and paler, but he gritted his teeth and didn't say a word. Halfway through, the nurse couldn't help but say, "You can't draw anymore. You'll be in trouble if you do." Ethan's eyes reddened, and his voice carried a hint of stubbornness. "No, keep drawing. He needs blood." In the end, he donated a full 1,000 cubic centimeters and almost fainted. Victoria quickly supported him, her voice trembling slightly. "Why did you do this?" Ethan smiled weakly, his voice barely audible. Because you are a very important person to me, and he is the person you love. Victoria's heart jolted as if struck hard by something. She looked down at Ethan in her arms, a complex emotion welling up inside her. For the first time, Victoria began to re-examine Ethan's love for her, passionate, unrestrained, unreserved, even willing to give his life for the person she loved, yet he didn't ask for the slightest response. She thought of Ethan's love for her over the years, and her voice carried a hint of guilt. My dad's matter, it really wasn't you who told on me. Ethan shook his head, his voice weak. No. I want you to be happy more than anyone else. Victoria's heart felt like it was being clenched tightly, and she was about to say something, but Ethan had already fainted. When Ethan woke up, he found himself lying in a hospital room, and a nurse pushed the door open, preparing to give him an IV. He quickly asked the nurse, was Julian saved? The nurse nodded, her tone tinged with dissatisfaction. He was saved. But your wife is really something. Asking you to donate blood to her brother, you almost lost your life, and she's still only focused on taking care of her brother. Ethan smiled, a smile of relief. He picked up his phone and sent a message to Robert Vance, you should know about Julian's suicide attempt. Victoria and I spent a few days together, but she still can't fall in love with me. I will divorce Victoria. Dad, no, Uncle, you said before that you would help them be together. Soon. Robert Vance replied, forget it. I don't care anymore. Do as you please. Ethan sighed in relief, his heart filled with release. Victoria's 3 regrets had all been fulfilled. Everyone's ending seemed to have changed, and it was time for him to leave. Victoria hadn't visited him once these past few days. Ethan always heard from the nurses about how she carefully cared for Julian, but he wasn't angry and instead had a smile on his face. On the day he was discharged from the hospital, the divorce certificate was also finalized. He sent a message to his parents asking them to go to the airport first while he went back to pack his last few belongings. In the evening, as Ethan was finishing packing, Victoria returned. Seeing him packing, Victoria was a little surprised. You already know that I plan to have you move out. Ethan was stunned for a moment. What? Victoria's tone was unusually gentle. Julian could be discharged from the hospital, but he's still very weak. I want to bring him here to stay for a while. But if you're here, I'm afraid it will be a stimulus to him. So I want you to stay at the Highland Lodge in the north of the city for a while. Ethan paused, then nodded. Okay. Victoria didn't expect him to agree so readily. Only then did she belatedly realize, was he being too magnanimous, knowing full well that she loved Julian? How much must he love her to remain calm and collected in this situation, even donating blood to save Julian and voluntarily agreeing to move out? Lost in thought, Ethan had already packed his luggage. Victoria snapped back to reality and took the luggage. I'll take you there. Ethan moved his lips, seeming to want to say something but ultimately didn't. He just said quietly, let's go. On the way, the two were silent until Julian called, saying he had been scalded by boiling water. Victoria's expression instantly became anxious. Ethan watched her slender fingers tap the steering wheel impatiently and said softly, go to him. I can get there myself. Victoria once again witnessed his generosity, but for some reason, she felt uneasy. She nodded and, as Ethan got out of the car, called out to him. Ethan, since I'm already married to you, I'll try to let go of Julian and live a good life with you. Afterwards, you can stay at the Highland Lodge for a month at most. You don't need to call me during this time. When the time is up, I'll personally pick you up. Ethan didn't respond. He silently got out of the car, and before leaving, he placed another copy of the divorce certificate on the car seat. Victoria was eager to see Julian and impatiently drove away, completely unaware of the divorce certificate in the car. Ethan watched the car disappear into the distance, gently smiled, and his thin lips moved slightly. Victoria, you can't let go of Julian, and I won't be coming back. This time, you can finally get what you want. He had completely let go, and he had let her go too. This departure was a farewell forever. He hailed another taxi and went straight to the airport. As the car passed over a bridge, he took off his wedding ring and threw it out the window. The ring drew an arc in the air and disappeared into the night. In the hospital, Victoria rushed to the ward and saw Julian crying. Ignoring everything else, she hurried forward, took Julian's hand, and looked panicked. "Julian, what's wrong?" Julian looked at her face, his eyes gradually turning red, and turned his head away. "What are you doing here? Didn't you say you didn't want me anymore?" Hearing this, Victoria's expression became even more panicked, and she held his hand tightly. "Who told you that? How could I not want you?" These words seemed to flip a switch, and Julian suddenly burst into tears, hugging her waist. "You clearly said you'd be back soon, but you were gone for so long. I thought you really didn't want me anymore." Victoria looked at Julian, who was in her arms with tears all over his face, and felt nothing but heartache, hugging him and patiently comforting him. "Even if the whole world doesn't want you, I won't let go of your hand." Julian then smiled through his tears and quickly reached out his hand. "Really? Then let's make a pinky promise, okay?" Victoria's voice was filled with affection as she extended her finger and hooked it with his. In the days that followed, Victoria stayed by Julian's side, not leaving his side for even a moment. To prove her promise, she would blow on the stomach-warming porridge to cool it before feeding it to Julian mouthful by mouthful. She would push him to walk in the garden when the weather was nice. Even on thunderous nights, she would hold him in her arms and lull him to sleep. Over time, the entire hospital knew that there was a wife who loved her husband very much in the VIP ward on the top floor. But there were also nurses who had seen old news gossiping in low voices. "I remember Miss Vance's husband didn't look like that, did he?" Before they could finish speaking, the head nurse warned them in a low voice, "Don't talk nonsense." While the nurses were gossiping, Victoria was helping Julian walk past. When Julian heard this, his eyes immediately turned red, and he struggled to break free from Victoria's hand and ran towards the ward. "Julian." Victoria was afraid that he would do something because of this and subconsciously went to chase after him. But as if remembering something, she suddenly stopped, her cold eyes sweeping over everyone in the room, finally settling on the head nurse. "I don't want to hear any more irrelevant people spouting nonsense here." At those words, several nurses collapsed to the ground, their eyes filled with despair. It was over. Victoria ignored them and stood outside Julian's hospital room, knocking repeatedly. "Julian, be good. Let me in, okay?" Because of what the nurse had said, Julian had locked her out, refusing to let her in no matter what. "No. Sister, we're siblings after all. If we're too close, people will gossip. You should go. I can take care of myself." Julian's muffled voice came through the door, and Victoria felt a pang in her heart. "Julian, what nonsense are you talking about? We're not." But as she said that, she seemed to remember something and stopped. Weren't they siblings? Although they were siblings before, both unmarried, there was still a possibility of being together. Now that she was married to Ethan Sterling, Julian could only be her brother. Victoria smiled bitterly and lowered her hand, preparing to leave. Suddenly, a loud crash came from inside the room. Her heart tightened, and she kicked the door open and rushed in. Julian. In the room, Julian sat blankly on the bed, a shattered glass on the floor. Seeing this, Victoria's heart clenched, and she strode forward, grabbing Julian's hand and examining it carefully. Only after confirming that he wasn't injured did Victoria breathe a sigh of relief. "Thank goodness you're okay." Julian hugged her waist again and cried aggrievedly. "What am I going to do? I can't do anything without you." Only then did Victoria realize what he had been about to do. She patted his back. "If you can't do it, then don't. I'm here. I'll always take care of you." Only then did Julian reveal a satisfied smile. On the day Julian was discharged from the hospital, Victoria specifically picked him up and brought him back to her marital home. But after parking the car, Julian was unwilling to get out, looking at Victoria with unease. "Sister, maybe we should just forget about it. After all, you're husband and wife. You're bound to do some intimate things. It wouldn't be good for an outsider like me to be here." After hearing Julian's words, Victoria knew what he was worried about. She chuckled and pulled him out of the car directly. "What outsider? You're the closest person to me. Besides, he's already moved to the Highland Lodge in the north of the city. He won't disturb your recovery." Julian was a little surprised. He had only mentioned it casually, but he didn't expect Victoria to actually send Ethan away. Looking at the undisguised love in her eyes, Julian became even more complacent. Ethan Sterling, so what if you're a husband? In the end, you still can't compare to me. Julian suppressed the smugness at the corner of his mouth and feigned worry. Won't he be angry? Angry? Victoria paused. Ethan had always been generous and gentle, never one to argue with others. Recently, she had abandoned him several times for Julian, but he hadn't made a fuss. Even when she asked him to move out, he hadn't said anything, even packing his luggage quickly and ahead of time. He won't. Just settle in here. Late at night, Julian fell into a deep sleep, and Victoria carefully pulled her arm out and quietly left the guest room. In a hospital, she could be careless about details and share a bed with Julian. After all, Julian was her brother, and it was only natural for a sister to take care of her brother. But back in the marital home, she felt inexplicably uneasy and finally returned to the bedroom she shared with Ethan. Late at night, the scenery outside the window was pitch black, and only a faint light illuminated Victoria's profile. She tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep. As soon as she closed her eyes, she heard Julian's question, "Won't Ethan be angry?" The more confident she had been in her answer at the time, the more uncertain she felt now. Finally, she picked up her phone and saw the empty text message dialog box and call history with Ethan and was suddenly stunned. How could it be? She repeatedly exited, entered, and refreshed her phone countless times, still no text or call from Ethan. Even though she had told Ethan not to call her, was he really being that obedient? Not a single call, not a single text. Victoria placed her phone face down on the blanket and glanced casually out the window. The moon from earlier had been swallowed by dark clouds, and a howling north wind, carrying fine, dense raindrops, swept in aggressively. Moisture rushed in from the window that hadn't been properly closed, bringing a penetrating chill and an overwhelming sense of frustration, just like the indescribable agitation in her heart right now. In the days that followed, Victoria turned down work and avoided all cocktail parties and social events, focusing solely on accompanying Julian. The shareholders complained incessantly and even reported her to Robert Vance. Victoria had expected to be scolded by her father, but nothing happened, which surprised her. However, she didn't have time to think about it. A few days ago, Julian had taken a liking to a pink gemstone. Because it was a private collection, Victoria had put in a great deal of effort to acquire it. Today was the day to pick it up. Julian was delighted to see the gemstone. To match it, he was selecting accessories at the collector's house. Victoria sat on the sofa beside him, keeping him company. Perhaps out of boredom, Victoria took out her phone to handle work. Just then, a text message popped up. She instinctively assumed it was from Ethan and quickly opened it, only to find it was spam. Victoria closed her eyes and tapped into her conversation with Ethan again, only to find it still blank. She stared blankly for a long time, searching her memory but couldn't find a time when she had forgotten to send him a text message. Ever since Ethan got his own phone in middle school, he would send her several texts every day. The content of the messages was simple, but each one revealed his concern, care, and affection for her. But now, it had been almost half a month since he had sent her a text. Victoria not only felt unaccustomed to it but even missed him a little. What was he doing at the Highland Lodge? How was he doing? Why was he being so obedient? She had told him not to call, and he didn't. She had told him not to text, and he didn't. A growing sense of longing surged in her heart like a tide. Victoria could no longer sit still and got up to leave. At that moment, Julian, holding a tie in each hand, turned to look at her expectantly. "Sister, where are you going?" Victoria snapped back to reality and quickly put her phone aside, asking, "Have you made your choice?" Julian smiled and pretended to be troubled. "But I like both of them so much. What should I do?" Victoria didn't say anything, she simply took the ties from his hands. "I'll go pay." Julian watched her leave with a happy expression until the heavy door closed in front of him. Only then did he drop the smile from his face and walk towards the sofa. The password for Victoria's phone was set by him. He easily unlocked it and immediately saw the blank chat box between her and Ethan. Julian stared at the phone for a long time, a hint of jealousy flashing in his eyes. He muttered to himself, "Ethan Sterling. Ethan Sterling." Now that you're gone, why are you still trying to bother her? It doesn't matter. I won't let you come back. Then, Julian took out his own phone and dialed a number. Burn down the Highland Lodge in the north of the city. Late at night, Julian clung to Victoria as usual. But Victoria, remembering the blank text message she had seen during the day, felt even more guilty toward Ethan. She suppressed her longing for Ethan and coaxed Julian to sleep. Then, she secretly drove to the villa in the north of the city. Unbeknownst to her, a figure appeared on the third-floor balcony the moment she left. Watching the car disappear into the distance, Julian raised his hand and made a call. Start burning. Soon, a positive response came from the other end of the phone. A cruel smile appeared on the corner of Julian's mouth. Then he went downstairs and drove to the north of the city as well. On the way to the Highland Lodge, Victoria's mood gradually calmed down in the cold wind. She seemed to understand why Ethan hadn't contacted her. She had initially let him stay in the lodge for a month, promising to pick him up when the time came, but it had been so long since Julian was discharged from the hospital, and she hadn't fulfilled her promise. Even if Ethan wasn't angry, he would be disappointed, which was why he hadn't contacted her. Thinking of this, Victoria's furrowed brow gradually smoothed out, and she pressed harder on the accelerator. It didn't matter, she would apologize to him properly when she saw him, and he would definitely forgive her. Soon, Victoria's car stopped halfway up the mountain where the Highland Lodge was located. Only a flight of stairs remained from the end of the road to the villa. Thinking that she would soon see Ethan, Victoria quickened her pace. But when she stepped onto the last step, the scene before her froze her in place. The sky was almost lit up by the raging fire, and billowing smoke carried debris everywhere. Even though she was still some distance from the villa, the scorching heat licked her exposed skin. Her mind went blank, and she could only think that Ethan was inside. Ethan. Victoria rushed in without a second thought. Bang. A violent explosion sounded, and shards and debris flew everywhere like sharp arrows. Neighbors who had arrived rushed forward to stop her. Miss Vance, calm down. You'll die if you rush in like that. We've already called the police, and the rescuers will be here soon. Victoria's eyes were bloodshot as she stared intently at the fire. Let go of me. My husband is still inside. As she spoke, she struggled desperately, trying to break free from everyone's restraint and rush into the fire. Miss, don't go in. There's no one inside. These words hit Victoria like a heavy hammer, pinning her to the spot. She turned her head stiffly, her voice trembling. What did you say? Soon, rescuers arrived and put out the fire, and black smoke rose from the ruins. Rescuers searched inside with dogs for valuables, neatly piling up the expensive jewelry that hadn't been burned in front of Victoria, confirming again that there was no one inside. Victoria stood there blankly like a statue. She couldn't hear anything, all she could hear was the rescuers' words, there was really no one inside. Victoria felt fortunate, but her heart was also full of questions. She clearly remembered sending Ethan here. Even if she had left him temporarily because of Julian, Ethan, with his personality, should still be here. But where was he now? Where had he gone? Thinking of this, Victoria couldn't worry about anything else and was about to rush down the mountain when a group of people came up the mountain. Stop. Where are you going? The person who came was Robert Vance, accompanied by Julian and Mrs. Vance. Originally, Julian wanted to witness Ethan's death with Victoria, but he met Robert and Eleanor who were looking for Victoria along the way, so they went up the mountain together and happened to run into Victoria. Hearing Robert's words, Victoria, who had calmed down, said calmly, I'm going to find Ethan. She was about to go down the mountain when Robert's next words froze her in place. No need to look. He's already gone abroad with his parents. This news was like a bolt from the blue. Victoria felt dizzy and didn't regain her voice until a long time later. Dad, what did you say? Robert looked at her and sighed deeply. After Ethan pleaded with me, he told me that as soon as the visa was approved, he would leave the country with his parents. And before he left, he also specifically asked me to do one thing, to help you and Julian get together after he divorces you. Robert's words were like thunderclaps exploding in Victoria's ears. She felt that the whole world was silent, and she couldn't hear anything. Divorce? Who is divorcing whom? Victoria's lips trembled, and she could barely hear what she was saying. Her mind went blank, and her heart felt like it was being tightly gripped by an invisible hand, her breathing becoming rapid and difficult. Impossible. Impossible. He must be lying to me. Ethan had loved her for so many years, how could he suddenly, for her? He must be lying to her. The day she dropped him off at the Highland Lodge, he had obediently nodded and waited for her to pick him up. How long had it been before he wanted a divorce? Victoria's chest rose and fell sharply, as if a large stone was pressing on her heart, making it difficult for her to breathe. Her hands gripped the railing tightly, her fingertips turning white, as if it was the only thing she could hold on to. Compared to her shock, Eleanor and Julian seemed much calmer. Eleanor had previously considered letting her daughter be with Julian, but due to their sibling relationship, she had to give up. Now that Robert had agreed, seeing Victoria and Julian's reactions, she was vaguely worried that this marriage wouldn't be so simple. And Julian, who was standing to the side, was overjoyed. He didn't expect Ethan to be so sensible. He thought he would have to put in a lot of effort to be with Victoria, but Ethan took the initiative to step aside. Thinking of this, Julian excitedly hugged Victoria and cheered. "That's great, Vicky. We can finally be together." After speaking, regardless of Robert and Eleanor being present, he was about to lower his head to kiss her. But Victoria pushed him away. "Vicky." Julian looked puzzled. Victoria seemed not to hear Julian's words, just kept shaking her head, saying she didn't believe it. Robert silently watched Victoria and Julian's reactions and suddenly remembered what Ethan had said before. With a little observation, it was easy to see that the affection between Victoria and Julian was very obvious. Now it seemed that it was true. It was just a pity for such a good person like Ethan. Seeing his daughter's reaction, Robert didn't say much, just turned the signed divorce agreement to the last page. The words are signed, the seal is stamped. How can he be lying to you? Victoria stared blankly at the divorce agreement in front of her, which had her name and Ethan's name on it, for a long time before she tremblingly took it. Her index finger caressed the two names, but she couldn't erase them no matter what. How could this be? Victoria was always cautious and never easily signed documents. How could she have signed a divorce agreement? Her thoughts drifted away, and she vaguely remembered that on their wedding night, a voice gently coaxed her in her ear, saying that as long as she signed, the other person wouldn't go on a blind date. At that time, her consciousness was eroded by alcohol, and she was only thinking about preventing Julian from going on a blind date, so she signed. Now she realized that it was Ethan coaxing her to sign the divorce agreement. Tear. The shattered paper flew everywhere, and Victoria looked at Robert and said word by word, "This divorce agreement was signed without my knowledge. I don't recognize it." Perhaps having anticipated that Victoria would have such a reaction, Robert directly took out a brand new divorce certificate. "Whether you recognize it or not, you are already divorced from him. I found this in your car, and you haven't even glanced at it in so many days." The booklet with the Civil Affairs Bureau seal was like a sharp sword directly piercing Victoria. She wanted to avoid this divorce certificate, but her legs went weak, and she almost fell. She grabbed the railing and forced herself to stand firm. She had to find Ethan. She had to see him immediately. She only had one thought in her mind: she didn't want to divorce Ethan. Absolutely not. She rushed down the mountain regardless. The sky gradually brightened, and the warm sunshine shone on the world, but Victoria's world had been turned upside down. On the first day after learning that Ethan had left, Victoria, after many days, finally took the initiative to call him again. The windshield blocked most of her view, but she could still see the sun in the sky being swallowed by dark clouds little by little. The sky gradually turned black, and Victoria's heart, like the sky, sank little by little. Ethan didn't answer her phone. Not a single call. Victoria took a deep breath and called the Sterling parents again, but the result was still no answer. Victoria's hand on the steering wheel gradually tightened. She began calling Ethan's friends, acquaintances, and even his former teachers and classmates one by one. However, no one could tell her where Ethan had gone. The day after learning of Ethan's departure, Victoria returned to their marital home and pushed open the door to Ethan's usual study, hoping to find some clues. Finally, after searching every corner of the study, she found a wish bottle that Ethan had written a long time ago. Inside the bottle was only a folded little star. When opened, it revealed the wish Ethan had once written: I hope that one day I can go to New Zealand with the person I love. On the third day after learning of Ethan's departure, Victoria boarded a plane to New Zealand. But she searched all over New Zealand and couldn't find any trace of Ethan. Unwilling to give up, she searched all over Europe but still couldn't find him. Just as she was about to board a plane to the United States, a phone call from Robert Vance forced her to return. "What are you even thinking?" Robert looked at the daughter in front of him, her face haggard and her eyes bloodshot, and sighed deeply. "You used to blame me for forcibly separating you and Julian and then forcing you to marry Ethan, whom you didn't love. Now everything is back on track. Ethan is divorced from you and has gone abroad, and your aunt and I no longer object to you and Julian. What are you doing now? Don't tell me you're still in love with Ethan after he left." Victoria's dizzy head only heard the last sentence from Robert. "She loves Ethan. How is that possible?" Although Victoria and Ethan grew up together as childhood sweethearts, her heart had always been on Julian. If it hadn't been for her and Julian's affair being exposed, she would never have had any further development with Ethan in this lifetime. So, even though she and Ethan were married, she never fell in love with him. She continued to leave him to find Julian, just like before they were married. Some friends couldn't stand it and asked her if she wasn't afraid of Ethan getting angry by doing this. Angry? It was good enough that she hadn't bothered Ethan about the marriage, right? Did he have to be angry? Later, Ethan complained to Robert, which caused Julian to attempt suicide. She became angry at Ethan for the first time. At that time, some friends also called to persuade her, saying that at least they were husband and wife, and if she made Ethan angry, what if he left? Victoria didn't care at all, thinking that Ethan loved her so much that he would never leave. Victoria had always been so confident. Until the divorce certificate was handed to her by Robert. Until she had been looking for Ethan for so long without finding any trace of him. Until she had been dreaming of Ethan all these days. And until Robert woke her up. Victoria looked down at the screen of her mobile phone, which showed the only wedding photo she and Ethan had ever taken together, and also the photo she saw him repeatedly wiping when she entered his study. As if possessed, she set the photo as the wallpaper on her phone. At this moment, looking at Ethan's curved, smiling eyes in the photo, the answer that had been ignored in her heart gradually emerged. She does love Ethan, doesn't she? Robert looked at Victoria's appearance and sneered. Then what about Julian? Don't you like him? The answer that she could always give quickly whenever she was asked before, Victoria couldn't say it now. Because Julian appeared in her life before Ethan, in a romantic sense, Victoria paid special attention to Julian. Over time, this attention turned into a strange sense of possessiveness. Victoria would feel inexplicably upset when Julian went on blind dates or dates with other women, as if the treasure she had treasured was being coveted. So she repeatedly snatched Julian back. She thought this was love. It wasn't until she met the new Ethan, until Ethan suddenly divorced her and went abroad, until she could no longer find him, that Victoria understood what true love was for the first time. Love was that she would search the world like a madwoman for Ethan. Love was that after Ethan left, her chest felt like a hollow, utterly empty. She even had fantasies, always feeling like she could turn around and see Ethan walking towards her. She loved him. Her longing became an illness. I think I know who I truly love. As for Julian, he's just my younger brother. Bang. The study door was suddenly flung open by Julian, who had been eavesdropping outside. Julian's eyes were bloodshot, and he sneered. Younger brother. He couldn't believe that these words would come from the mouth of the woman he had loved for so many years. Once, Victoria loved him so deeply, and even when everyone reminded them that they were siblings, she would repeatedly correct them, saying that they were just a couple who couldn't be together. She even told him, apart from marriage, I can give you anything. Victoria was so sincere when she said those words that Julian gave her his whole heart and all his love. Now she was actually saying that she only saw him as a younger brother. Ha! Julian laughed until tears almost streamed down his face. Younger brother? What sister secretly kisses her younger brother? What sister ruins her younger brother's blind dates? What sister sleeps in the same bed as her younger brother? Eleanor, who had followed in, saw her son's frantic state and hurriedly tried to pull him away, but Robert got up first and led Eleanor away. Solve your own mess. Bang. The study door slammed shut. In the empty room, Julian looked at the silent Victoria with tears streaming down his face, feeling like his heart was about to break. He couldn't help but wonder if the youth he had spent on Victoria all these years had been wasted. He knew that given their relationship, they could never be together openly, but that was okay. He could endure it as long as Victoria loved him, only him. So he was willing for her to ruin his blind dates again and again, willing for her to take him away from other men again and again, and willing for her to abandon her newlywed husband to be with him wholeheartedly. He thought they would always be like this until the news of Ethan's sudden divorce and departure abroad came. He was overjoyed, thinking that he could be with Victoria forever from then on. But he never dreamed that Victoria would see him as a younger brother and fall in love with Ethan. No. No. Absolutely not. Victoria could only be his. Robert didn't know how Victoria and Julian resolved their problems that day, only that night, he suddenly heard an angry roar and a woman scream from Victoria's room. When he and Eleanor rushed to the scene, they saw two naked people in the room, one sitting on the bed and the other, covered in torn clothes, lying on the floor crying. The next day, the news that the Vance family's daughter was going to marry her half-sibling spread throughout the city. The marriage of a stepsister and stepbrother became a laughingstock in the entire circle. In the study, Victoria smashed everything in the room, her face extremely ugly. "You knew that Julian's attempt to drug me failed. Why are you still forcing me to marry him?" Robert didn't look at her, his tone exceptionally calm. "You have already let one man down. Don't break another man's heart. Victoria, Dad is old. I just want to see you settle down." Robert's words didn't move Victoria at all. She looked at her father for a long time and finally stormed out. "The only husband I recognize is Ethan Sterling." The Vance family scandal spread to the Sterling family across the ocean. Hearing the news that Victoria and Julian were going to get married, Ethan's father and mother were extremely shocked. It took Mrs. Sterling a long while to react. So when Ethan said she had someone in her heart, it was Julian. Ethan had known about the affair between Victoria and Julian for a long time and simply nodded calmly. Bang. Mr. Sterling slammed the table in anger. Good for the Vance family. I knew there was something fishy about how eagerly the Vance family came to our door back then. So they wanted to use our son to cover up their family scandal. Mrs. Sterling's expression also darkened, and she sneered incessantly. The Vance family really knows how to calculate. Whether they succeeded in breaking them up or not, all the anger would be vented on Ethan, making things easy for them, while my son became the eternal sinner. Ethan thought so too. Wasn't it true? It was clearly the Vance family who forced Victoria to marry him, yet Victoria blamed all the wrongs and hatred on him, an innocent man, ultimately leading him to such despair. Fortunately, he had severed the ill-fated connection with Victoria in this life. From now on, the Vance family and Victoria would be completely unrelated to him. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling became increasingly angry and immediately wanted to buy plane tickets back to China to settle the score with Victoria. Ethan quickly stopped the elders, and after much persuasion, he managed to dissuade them. Just when Mr. and Mrs. Sterling had finally calmed down, the butler suddenly came in from outside, looking at them with a troubled expression. "Sir, madam, young master, there's someone at the door claiming to be the young master's wife." The butler was newly hired after the Sterling family moved to England and didn't recognize Victoria, but he knew that the young master was single, so he didn't let Victoria in immediately but made her wait outside while he came in to report. Upon hearing that Victoria had arrived, Mr. Sterling smashed the teacup in his hand on the ground. "Tell her to get lost." The butler didn't dare to act rashly. He could tell that the person's clothes were extraordinary and knew that her background was not ordinary. If he offended her, the consequences would be unimaginable. Seeing the butler's troubled expression, Ethan said, "Just tell her that I won't see her." Soon, the butler returned again. "Young master, she said she won't leave if she can't see you." Ethan pondered for a moment and followed the butler towards the gate. "Ethan." Mrs. Sterling suddenly called out to him. Ethan knew what his mother was worried about, so he smiled at her. "It's okay, Mom. I know what I'm doing." A heavy door separated Ethan and Victoria. Ethan knew when he left that with the Vance family's capabilities, it was only a matter of time before Victoria found him. If he remembered correctly, today was supposed to be Victoria and Julian's wedding day. Instead of being a bride in China, she ran here wanting to catch up with her ex-husband. Obviously, Victoria didn't think so. Seeing Ethan walking closer and closer, her originally dull eyes gradually brightened. Ethan. If it weren't for the door in between, Victoria probably would have rushed up to hug Ethan already. Compared to Victoria's excitement, Ethan was particularly calm, and his gaze towards her showed no ripples. "What are you doing here?" When he was by Victoria's side, Ethan's tone was always gentle and patient, but now it was calm and distant. Victoria was a little unaccustomed to his tone. After a long while, she said in a hoarse voice, "I'm here to take you home." Perhaps realizing that her words were a bit strange, she added, "I don't agree to our divorce." "You're still my husband." Husband. Ethan found it somewhat laughable. They had been married for so long, but she had never treated him as her husband. Now that he didn't love her anymore, she remembered that he was her husband. "Victoria, I don't need your consent to divorce you. Besides, don't you still have Julian?" Hearing this, a hint of panic flashed in Victoria's eyes. "I won't be with Julian. He's just my brother. Ethan, I only have you in my heart." Ethan was amused by her words. As he laughed, the corners of his eyes were soaked with tears. He wiped away his tears casually and said word by word, "Victoria, there's someone in your heart, but that person is definitely not me. If you or the Vance family had told me earlier that you liked Julian, I would never have married you. That way, he wouldn't have been so wounded by her aloofness and rejection. What happened in the past, let's pretend it never happened. Don't come looking for me again. I won't turn back for you anymore." Ethan said decisively, then turned around without hesitation and disappeared from Victoria's sight. Victoria was still immersed in Ethan's words, completely shocked. She had never imagined that Ethan wouldn't want to marry her. He clearly liked her so much before. When he heard about the engagement between the two families, the joy in his eyes almost overflowed. Why? She had clearly explained her relationship with Julian to him. Why couldn't he give her a chance? Victoria's hands gradually clenched. The pain of her nails digging into her palms spread throughout her body, but she was completely unaware, standing there like a statue until the heavy rain poured down, enveloping her. She still didn't move. "Vicky, shall we go back?" After an unknown amount of time, a gentle male voice sounded beside Victoria. She turned her head blankly and saw Julian holding an umbrella for her. Looking at Victoria's lifeless eyes, Julian felt like his throat was locked by a piece of bitter melon, unable to swallow or spit out. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. From now on, he was no longer Victoria's younger brother but Mr. Vance, who could stand by her side openly. But his bride had run away. He took a private jet to England overnight, only to see her standing blankly outside the Sterling family's door. Why? Ethan clearly didn't love her anymore. Why was she still so persistent? "Can't you turn around and look at me?" At this moment, Julian had lost all his previous smugness, leaving only endless humility. He thought that even if Victoria didn't like him now, so what? They had so many years of affection after all, and so much time in the future. She would eventually like him. However, Victoria would not give him a satisfactory answer. "Julian, what happened between us was a mistake. Forcing it won't end well." Julian didn't want to listen at all. He suddenly threw the umbrella at Victoria and roared, crying, "Then what about you? He doesn't love you anymore. Why are you still forcing him to turn back? Victoria, you can only be with me in this life." Victoria didn't react at all, not even looking at him again, and walked into the rain. "Victoria." No matter how Julian shouted her name with all his might, she didn't stop for a moment. Julian's whole body trembled violently. He clenched his palms tightly and took a deep breath. After a long time, he turned his head and took a deep look at the villa, finally disappearing into the rain as well. Ethan thought he had made himself clear and decisive enough, but the next day, at a banquet, he ran into Victoria again, and Julian, who was closely following her, preventing other men from approaching. Ethan wanted to pretend he didn't see her and turned to walk towards the head of a certain family, but a slender hand suddenly blocked his path. "Ethan." A low, hoarse female voice sounded, but his eyes fell on Julian's face. Julian's face was filled with all sorts of emotions: jealousy, vigilance, and unease. In a daze, Ethan seemed to see himself from a long time ago. At that time, he was like Julian now, guarding against every man who approached Victoria, but he had overlooked Julian. He withdrew his gaze and looked at Victoria again. "Miss Vance, please excuse me." The distant tone made pain flash across Victoria's face. "Ethan, do we have to be so estranged?" "Estranged?" A cold smile appeared on the corner of Ethan's lips. "If calling you Miss is considered distant, then what about your attitude towards me after our marriage? Besides, we are ex-husband and ex-wife now, and you have your own partner. Isn't it right to maintain a basic distance?" Ethan was too lazy to continue arguing with Victoria. He directly brushed her hand away and walked off. "Ethan." Victoria subconsciously wanted to follow, but how could Julian give her the chance? He held Victoria's hand tightly, his eyes full of pleading. "Vicky, I am your husband." The agreed-upon words made Victoria frown. She looked coldly at Julian, who was on the verge of tears. For the first time, she found Julian's crying annoying. Ethan would never cry, even when she had sent him away for Julian. He could quickly adjust his emotions and wouldn't cry as loudly as Julian. The more she ignored him, the louder he cried. Their commotion quickly attracted a crowd of onlookers. The joke of the marriage between the half-siblings of the Vance family had already spread abroad. After all, everyone was well-mannered and didn't gossip in front of them, but the mocking glances made Victoria feel uncomfortable all over. As the future heir of the Vance family, she was always the center of attention at banquets, but this was the first time she had been scrutinized with such strange eyes. She took a deep breath and forcibly pulled Julian's hand off her arm. "Julian, I'm reminding you for the last time. We are not married, you are not my husband, and there will be no possibility between us." Victoria left those words and walked towards another hall without looking back. Only Julian was left standing there blankly watching her figure disappear, the grievance in his eyes gradually turning into hatred and unwillingness. His fingernails pierced his palm, and drops of blood dripped onto the ground from between his fingers. Ethan Sterling. In the distance, Ethan was chatting happily with a certain lady when a furious voice suddenly came from behind him. He subconsciously turned around and saw Julian rushing towards him with a face full of hatred, raising his hand to slap him in the face. Ethan quickly blocked Julian's slap and splashed the red wine in his glass onto his face. Splash. Then a slap followed, landing on Julian's face, instantly reddening and swelling his fair cheek. "Julian, what's your problem?" Ethan had endured Julian for many years for Victoria's sake. Now that he no longer loved her, he naturally no longer needed to be polite to Julian. Half of Julian's well-groomed hair was disheveled by Ethan's slap, and stray hairs covered half of his crazed face. Along with those poppy-like vicious eyes, he looked insane. He looked at Ethan for a long time, then fiercely wiped the dripping wine from his face. "I'm crazy." "Then what are you?" "Being promiscuous about seducing Vicky everywhere." "Ethan, do you have no shame?" Slap. Ethan slapped him again. "If your mouth can't speak properly, shut it. You need to get this straight. I haven't had anything to do with Victoria for a long time. She's the one who keeps pestering me. Instead of governing her, what kind of man are you to get angry at me?" But Julian couldn't listen to a word, his mind was filled with hatred. When Victoria initially said she didn't want to marry him, he thought about going directly to Ethan to settle the score. However, his mother, who always doted on him, unusually stopped him and told him to restrain his temper, saying that if he became more humble, Victoria would pity him and feel sorry for him. He had always been a good son who listened to his mother and did as he was told, but it had no effect at all. Victoria was still stingy and wouldn't even spare him a glance, her whole heart belonged to Ethan. Although Julian had entered the Vance family with his mother at a young age, he had been pampered and spoiled and couldn't bear such grievances. So he came directly to the culprit to settle the score. "Ethan, you should have died in the fire back then." Only if Ethan died could Victoria belong to him completely. Thinking of this, a surge of strength he didn't know where it came from surged within him, and he suddenly grabbed Ethan's hand and tried to throw him downstairs. At that moment, Ethan was standing on the outdoor balcony, and the only way to leave was a long, high staircase. Falling down would mean death or serious injury. Naturally, Ethan wouldn't let Julian succeed, and he struggled desperately. But at this moment, Julian was consumed by hatred. In the next moment, Ethan lost his footing, and his entire body fell straight down the stairs. Ethan. Victoria, who had rushed over from afar, saw this scene, and her mind went blank. By the time she reacted, her body only had enough time to protect Ethan. With a loud bang, Victoria and Ethan fell down the stairs together. After a long time, a blood-red flower slowly bloomed beneath Victoria. Ah! Something happened. Immediately, screams, alarms, and ambulance sirens blended together. Ethan only felt very sleepy, and he closed his eyes and completely lost consciousness. Slap. Outside the operating room, Mrs. Vance slapped Julian hard across the face, her voice filled with disappointment. "How could I have a son like you?" Mrs. Vance had always thought that her son, even at his boldest, would only resort to drugging Victoria, but she never expected him to dare to push someone off a high platform. If Robert Vance hadn't been so enraged by this incident that he investigated Julian's past, she wouldn't have known that her own son had even dared to commit arson. Julian lowered his head, covering his face where he had been slapped, and after a long time replied, "Isn't that what you taught me, Mom?" When Julian was 6 years old, Mrs. Vance couldn't bear her ex-husband's constant alcoholism and domestic violence and resolutely chose to divorce, taking Julian with her on the condition of leaving everything behind. Life for a divorcee and her son was not easy. After being harassed and teased by various people for a long time, Mrs. Vance resisted again and successfully married the widowed Robert Vance, transforming into the new mistress of the Vance family. The comfortable life allowed Mrs. Vance's tense nerves to finally relax, and with nothing better to do, she began to focus her attention on Julian. She taught Julian all her experiences over the years, telling him how to marry a good partner and live a good life. "I did say you could use any means to cling to someone, but I didn't tell you to do such illegal things." Mrs. Vance trembled with anger, raising her hand for another slap. "All right, stop making a scene." Robert Vance, who had just signed the papers in the operating room, suddenly shouted sternly, successfully interrupting Mrs. Vance's actions. Mrs. Vance quickly teared up while walking towards Robert apologetically. "Darling, this is my fault." Before she could finish speaking, a tear slid down Mrs. Vance's face. The tricks that had always worked on Robert in the past were no longer effective. But Robert's expression softened slightly. After all, she was his wife of many years. He didn't respond but asked Mrs. Vance to follow him to Ethan's ward to apologize to the Sterling family. But the Sterling family didn't even let them in the door. "Please go back, both of you. Our Sterling family is small and humble, and we really can't bear your apology." Mr. Sterling raised his hand to block the door of the ward, his face very ugly. He thought that his son's divorce from Victoria would be the end of it, but he didn't expect to encounter such a disaster. Although the Sterling family was still not comparable to the Vance family, Mr. Sterling didn't give the Vance family any face at all because, in his heart, his son was the most important thing. Robert Vance also knew that they were in the wrong in this matter, so he couldn't get angry and could only inquire about Ethan's condition with concern. Because Victoria had acted as a cushion, Ethan wasn't seriously injured and only needed a few days of rest. Hearing that Ethan was all right, Mrs. Vance's anxious heart finally settled. Although she was indeed angry at her son's actions, she didn't want another life on his hands. After apologizing to the Sterling family repeatedly, Mrs. Vance and Robert finally left. "You too." Suddenly, Mr. Sterling's voice rang out from behind them. Mrs. Vance and Robert stopped but didn't turn around. "I don't want to see Victoria again." The meaning behind his words was self-evident. Robert didn't reply and continued to disappear with Mrs. Vance outside the gates. Knowing that Mr. Sterling would agree, Victoria finally woke up on the third day of her coma. After Robert expressed his concern for her health, he left the disposal of Julian to her. Although Mrs. Vance felt sorry for her son, she didn't want him to continue being foolish, so she said nothing. Victoria was silent for a while before slowly saying, "I have some things I want to ask him." In the quiet hospital room, Victoria silently watched Julian, who was lowering his eyes, afraid to look at her. Suddenly, she remembered the first time she met Julian. That afternoon, Julian, wearing a small pink shirt, grabbed her hand and said sweetly, "Will you be my sister?" Sister. From now on, how could someone so pure and kind become so vicious? She asked this question, and it took a long time for Julian to answer. He sobbed and whispered, "I love you too much. I can't accept you being with other men." Julian cried so pitifully, but it didn't evoke even a shred of pity from Victoria. She closed her eyes and called for the housekeeper. Handle it as it should be handled. Meaning she would no longer care about Julian. No. Don't. Vicky, you can't do this to me. I can't go to prison. Julian's face was full of fear, but Victoria remained motionless. Victoria. Julian struggled desperately, his fingernails scratching a long mark on the door frame, but he was still dragged out by the housekeeper. Thump. Julian's piercing cries were blocked by the thick hospital door. Only then did Victoria reopen her eyes and get out of bed. Since she had been in a coma until now, she hadn't heard any news about Ethan. She had asked others indirectly, but they had all remained silent. Victoria felt increasingly uneasy. So, after dealing with Julian, she wanted to rush out of the hospital room, disregarding her unhealed body. The next moment, 2 dutiful bodyguards stepped forward and stopped her. Miss, the master has just given an order that you cannot go to see Mr. Sterling again. Victoria didn't listen at all, only telling the 2 bodyguards to get out of the way. But the 2 bodyguards turned a deaf ear, still blocking her. Miss, please don't make things difficult for us. Get out. Victoria. A stern shout suddenly interrupted the struggle. Robert Vance stood in the distance, coldly watching his daughter. Get back to your room. Dad. Why won't you let me see him? Robert sneered. Why should he want to see you? You've done so many outrageous things. What face do you have to see him? The barrage of questions left Victoria speechless, unable to say a word for a long time. Robert no longer cared about her but just told the bodyguards to continue guarding the door. That night, Robert received news that Victoria had sneaked out of the hospital to see Ethan. Master, should we bring Miss back? Robert shook his head. No. Let her suffer a little. This way, she can learn a lesson. Late at night, a woman in a hospital gown ran panting to the front gate of the Sterling family home. But no matter what Victoria said, the Sterling family's bodyguards wouldn't let her in. In the end, the housekeeper came out with Mr. Sterling's words. Miss Vance, I implore you to show some mercy and stop hurting our young master. Boom. A bolt of lightning tore through the sky, illuminating Victoria's pale face. The pouring rain lashed against her face, finally pulling her wandering thoughts back. What do you mean hurting him? The housekeeper's expression turned completely cold. Miss Vance has a convenient memory. Have you forgotten how you concealed your affection for your stepbrother and married our young master? Have you forgotten how you repeatedly neglected our young master and bullied him time and time again for Julian after the marriage? Indeed, in your eyes, these don't count as harm, but these things almost cost our young master's life. But don't overthink it, Miss Vance. Our young master doesn't need your apology now, either. Boom. Another deafening thunderclap made Victoria's ears ring. She clenched her hands tightly to suppress the tremor that ran through her body. Victoria knew that her actions would hurt Ethan, but at that time, her heart was filled with Julian, and she thought Ethan was always generous and wouldn't hold these things against her. Even if Ethan really got angry, she could just apologize to him. She even forgot to apologize later, thinking he wouldn't care. Now that Ethan really didn't care, Victoria only felt the hollow in her heart, as if something had slipped out of her body and she could no longer grasp it. The Sterling family's housekeeper continued to speak, looking at Victoria soaked to the bone and pale-faced. The housekeeper closed his mouth, then changed to a more subtle tone. Miss Vance, you also know that our Sterling family is small and lacks resources, unable to compete with your family. If you continue to entangle with our young master, it will only end in mutual destruction. Just let him go. Please don't come looking for him anymore. Buzz. The heavy iron gate slammed shut in front of Victoria, the heavy buzzing sound as it closed causing her heart to tremble. After a long time, Victoria finally looked up at the dark villa in the distance, a bitter smile on her lips. Since her affair with Julian was exposed and Ethan divorced her, everyone had been advising her to give up on Ethan. Her friends said that what she did was too much, and even with a sincere apology, Ethan might not forgive her. Her father said that it was the Vance family's fault to begin with, concealing her relationship with Julian and deceiving Ethan. He was already being lenient by not making a fuss about the fraudulent marriage. If she continued to pester him, it would be unreasonable. The Sterling family's housekeeper also begged her to let Ethan go, saying that if they continued to be entangled, it would only end in mutual destruction. And Ethan said that he would never turn back for her again. But Victoria was unwilling. Ethan had loved her for so long, and she had only just realized her love for him. This love that should have been mutual had been destroyed by her without realizing it and was sentenced to death before she even had a chance to make amends. Victoria moved her body, wanting to reopen the closed gate of the Sterling family. But as soon as she raised her hand, she suddenly felt weak all over. Her vision went black, and she knew nothing more. Victoria fell ill, constantly calling out Ethan's name. After all, she was his own flesh and blood whom he had raised for over 20 years, and Robert Vance's heart softened. At this moment, despite his resentment, he had no face to ask Ethan to come to the hospital to see Victoria. Instead, he asked someone to make a phone call to Ethan, begging him to talk to Victoria. Because the phone was on speaker, Ethan's parents also heard the content of the call clearly. Beside Ethan, as soon as they heard Robert's request, Mr. and Mrs. Sterling were so angry that they wanted to snatch the phone to scold him. Their son, whom they had doted on for more than 20 years, had been hurt by Victoria for so long, and they had already used up the favor that Robert Vance had previously done for the Sterling family by not pursuing the matter. How could Robert have the nerve to make such a request now? Ethan held back his parents who were about to start scolding and walked towards the balcony with the phone. "Uncle Vance, I can agree to your request, and I can even go to the hospital to see her. But I have one condition." On the other end of the phone, Robert was incredibly excited. He had already prepared to be scolded by the Sterling family, but he didn't expect Ethan to agree to his plea without hesitation. Okay. As long as you come to the hospital to see Vicky, I'll agree to whatever you ask." Ethan looked at the setting sun in the distance and said slowly, "I hope that Victoria will never appear in my life again. We're completely even." Robert was silent for a moment and finally agreed. Ethan hung up the phone, tidied himself up, and headed to the hospital. Victoria, who had been hospitalized for several days, finally recovered from her high fever and woke up from her coma. Because she wasn't fully awake when she saw Ethan beside her, she thought she was dreaming, so she forced a bitter smile and said, "Another dream." "Not a dream." The long-lost male voice rang in her ears. Victoria suddenly opened her eyes wide, eager to get up and hug him. But after being sick for so long, Victoria didn't have much strength. She suddenly sat up and fell back on the bed with a thud. "Ethan." She stared at the person in front of her obsessively, as if trying to imprint his appearance in her mind forever. Compared to Victoria's excitement, Ethan seemed particularly calm. "Victoria, I thought that according to your personality, you wouldn't continue to pester me after our divorce." Victoria subconsciously wanted to explain, but Ethan shook his head at her and continued. "After all, it seems like you've never had me in your heart. Actually, I knew a long time ago that something was wrong between you and Julian. But I thought you were step-siblings after all, and you wouldn't do anything too outrageous, so I dismissed that doubt. But I didn't expect my doubts to be correct. Still, I held on to hope for you, thinking that once we got married, you would restrain yourself, would gradually take your heart back and put it on me. But you didn't. Victoria, do you know? I knew about every lie you told for Julian. I used to hope you would admit it yourself, but later I couldn't even be bothered to expose it because I don't love you anymore. Imagine if you were me. If you experienced what I experienced, would you forgive yourself?" Ethan's tone was calm from beginning to end, as if he were telling someone else's story. After he finished speaking, he saw the guilt, regret, and many other complex emotions on Victoria's face. Victoria had a lot of things she wanted to say to Ethan, but in the end, she only managed to squeeze out 3 words. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry, even though you loved me so much, I lied to you. I'm sorry, even though I was lying to you, I felt it was only natural. I'm sorry, even though I knew you were sad, I still didn't care. I'm sorry, even though I knew you didn't care, I was still unwilling." Victoria's apology, after crossing Ethan's 2 lifetimes, finally reached him. Ethan really wanted to smile magnanimously at Victoria and say, "It's okay, I don't care anymore." But as soon as he opened his mouth, he tasted bitter tears. In Victoria's panicked eyes, Ethan raised his hand and touched his face, only then realizing that he was crying. But what was there to be sad about? He clearly didn't love her anymore. Ethan didn't understand, but he wouldn't look for the answer anymore. Not long after, Victoria was discharged from the hospital. She specifically invited Ethan again, saying she wanted to say a proper goodbye. Ethan thought about it and finally agreed. When the plane landed and he exited the terminal and saw Victoria, he looked surprised. Victoria was wearing the clothes she had worn a long time ago when Robert Vance had forced her to go on a date with Ethan. Her stunned expression made Victoria chuckle. She subconsciously reached out to take his hand but then remembered their current relationship and silently withdrew it. "Let's go." When Victoria picked him up, she was still driving the same Maybach as before, but the interior decoration had changed from the trendy and cool style that Julian liked to the elegant style that Ethan preferred. Even the music playing on the car stereo was Ethan's favorite. He said nothing but closed his eyes and pretended to sleep. Victoria paused, then silently turned up the temperature on the car's air conditioning. For lunch, they chose Chinese food that Ethan liked, and the dishes they ordered were also to his taste. During the meal, Victoria thoughtfully peeled shrimp for him, served him soup, and handed him tissues. Her attentiveness prompted the husband at the next table to stare at his wife. "Look at how that wife treats her husband." Upon hearing this, Ethan turned to look at the men and explained with a smile, "She's not my wife. She's my ex-wife." "Ah." A look of embarrassment flashed across the man's face, and he smiled apologetically at Ethan. "Sorry." Ethan shook his head and continued to eat the food in his bowl. Victoria across from him had no reaction from beginning to end. After lunch, Victoria took Ethan to see a movie. In the past, Victoria often took him to the movies, but since Julian was still around, she would always choose the movies that Julian liked. And Ethan? He didn't matter. And even when Julian wasn't there, Ethan and Victoria never watched a complete movie together because she would either ditch him or leave halfway for Julian. This was the first time they had watched a movie that Ethan liked from beginning to end. By the time they came out of the cinema, the sky was covered in darkness, dotted with stars. Victoria stopped the car halfway. Before Ethan could react, she got out of the car and opened his car door on the passenger side. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked in confusion. But Victoria didn't answer, only gesturing for him to look up at the sky. Suddenly, fireworks began to burst in the sky, one after another. The colorful lights attracted passers-by to stop and watch, and even Ethan was drawn in. He couldn't help but get out of the car and walk to the riverbank, gazing intently at the fireworks in the air. Fireworks are beautiful but fleeting. Finally, the fireworks formed Ethan's initials in the air and then disappeared completely. But he still hadn't recovered. He seemed to know what Victoria was trying to do. A long, long time ago, Ethan especially liked all sorts of shiny things, and fireworks had become his favorite. Back then, Victoria still doted on him, so she promised to set off fireworks for him every year on his birthday. But in the end, when the protagonist's name was displayed by the fireworks, Ethan realized that these fireworks were specifically for Julian, and he was just a spectator borrowing the light. He was young back then and couldn't hide his emotions, so he would cry and ask Victoria, why. Victoria would apologetically say that Julian also liked them and that next time she would definitely set off a fireworks display just for him. But Ethan had heard her next time many times and still hadn't waited for the fireworks. Now that he and she were divorced and he no longer loved her, her exclusive fireworks were finally being set off for him. See? It was as if Victoria's love for him only came when he no longer needed it. That night, Victoria didn't take Ethan to a hotel but instead chose to take him back to their former marital home. Ethan had left in a hurry, so he hadn't had time to throw away many things. Therefore, the house still looked as it did when he left, as if it were waiting for its male master to return at any moment. After a long, long time, he had returned, but as a guest. The servants in the villa were still the same ones who had served Ethan before. Seeing him return, the servants were exceptionally excited. The word "sir" circled their mouths for a long time before finally becoming "young Master Sterling." Ethan nodded at them with a smile in his eyes, then politely asked, "Excuse me, where is my room?" The servants instinctively looked towards Victoria, and only after receiving her nod did they lead Ethan upstairs. His room wasn't the marital room he and Victoria once shared, nor was it Julian's room, but a newly created large south-facing room. The decorations inside the room were also according to his preferences. Ethan looked around, and just as he was about to push open the balcony door to get some air, there was a sudden knock on the door. He opened the door to see Victoria standing before him, already changed into her pajamas. "What's wrong?" Victoria looked at him deeply for a long while before saying, "Nothing. Just wanted to wish you good night." In the past, when Ethan was at the villa, he would wish her good night every time before going to sleep, and it had gradually become Victoria's habit. Later, after he left, Victoria's good night went unanswered, and she gradually began to suffer from insomnia. Ethan clearly remembered this, and he looked at her and said softly, "Good night." That night, Victoria unprecedentedly had a good night's sleep and even had a good dream. In her dream, Ethan not only didn't leave her but was also deeply in love with her, and the two of them grew old together. But outside the dream, Victoria looked at the empty room and felt as if all the blood in her body had frozen. The name Ethan remained stuck in her throat for a long time until a familiar, gentle male voice sounded behind her. "What are you doing standing here?" Before Ethan could finish his words, a pair of large hands tightly embraced him. Her trembling voice fell into his ear. Thankfully. Victoria knew that the time she and Ethan had to spend together was dwindling and would eventually reach zero. She could accept Ethan leaving her again, but she no longer had the courage to see him disappear secretly again. Ethan didn't say anything, just allowed her to hug him. He knew clearly what she was afraid of, but he would no longer hug her back and comfort her like he used to. After all, this was originally a solemn farewell. In the days that followed, Ethan and Victoria revisited the entire city. They went to Lover's Bridge, to the ends of the earth viewpoint, and even to their high school. The sweet traces she and Julian had left behind had all been erased, leaving only a blank slate. Originally, Victoria wanted to leave new traces of her and Ethan, but Ethan said there was no need. After all, the two had already gone their separate ways, and leaving these traces would be useless. Victoria pursed her lips and finally agreed with Ethan with a soft "okay." Finally, they arrived at a photo studio. Ironically, after knowing each other for so many years, they didn't even have a single photo of just the two of them. Most of the photos they were in also had Julian or other people present, and even the photos on their marriage certificate were photoshopped. Now, Victoria was begging Ethan to take a photo with her just to put an end to their past. Ethan agreed. But in their photo, the two were standing far apart, the distance between them like a chasm. He wasn't willing to come closer, and she couldn't cross over. The photographer even joked that the two didn't look like they were taking a couple's photo but more like a divorcing couple taking a farewell photo. The corners of Victoria's mouth turned bitter. Weren't they a divorcing couple? On Ethan's last night in the country, Victoria suddenly handed him a newly drafted divorce agreement. "I wasn't very clear-headed when I signed the last time, so there were many clauses that weren't written properly. I want to do it again. We should sign a divorce agreement properly this time." Ethan bit his lip and finally reached out to take the divorce agreement. Indeed, he initially just wanted to leave her wholeheartedly to fulfill her happiness with Julian. Therefore, he asked for nothing in the divorce agreement, practically leaving with nothing. Now, this new divorce agreement had many conditions added by Victoria that were favorable to him. The amount of funds alone totaled over 100 million, not to mention the houses and cars she forcefully included. Ethan looked at it for a long time and finally asked, "Do I have to sign it?" "Sign it. If you don't, I'll just force it on you. And if you sign it, my guilt will be lessened." Ethan pressed down on the pen and finally wrote his name at the end of the agreement. The day Ethan left was a beautiful day. Every traveler at the airport saying goodbye to loved ones was smiling because they had another meeting to look forward to. But only Victoria and Ethan didn't have even a hint of a smile. "Will you ever come back?" Even though Victoria already knew the answer, she still held onto a sliver of hope. What if? After all, this was the place Ethan had spent over 20 years, and he had left behind many memories other than her. People always have reluctance, always have nostalgia, always think about coming back to see. But Ethan was destined to disappoint her. No. After all, where my parents are is my home. Hearing this, Victoria's originally bright eyes instantly dimmed, but she still didn't give up. "What about me? Can I come see you? Even if it's just to see him from afar." This time, Ethan didn't speak, just silently looked at her. The answer was obvious. Victoria lowered her head and laughed bitterly. She should have known. She had done so many excessive things to him, the best outcome was that he didn't hate her. How could she still expect to visit him? At this time, the boarding announcement for passengers traveling to England began. Ethan said a soft goodbye to her and was about to walk towards the boarding gate. Ethan. Panic flashed in Victoria's eyes, and she quickly hugged his waist. I regret it. I really regret it. Please don't go. Ethan looked down at the hands wrapped around his waist and said softly, but Victoria, there's no such thing as regret medicine in this world. Even if you regret it, we can't go back. We can only keep moving forward. Finally, the hands that were holding him tight suddenly loosened. Victoria watched helplessly as the men she loved, the men who once loved her, gradually disappeared into the boarding gate. She couldn't hold it in anymore. The excruciating pain in her heart tearing at her nerves, and a mouthful of blood suddenly spewed out of her mouth. Accompanied by the screams of passengers, Victoria fell straight to the ground. This time, there was no longer a person who loved her wholeheartedly rushing towards her frantically. At the hospital, the doctor tactfully reminded her to rest, but Victoria still learned from the cries of her father and mother outside the door that she didn't have much time left. But she wasn't surprised at all. During the time Ethan left her, she smoked and drank all day long. The fact that she was still alive was already a blessing from God. But she didn't say anything, just silently looked at Ethan's newly posted social media update. In the photo, Ethan and his parents were hugging each other tightly, looking happily at the camera, and his caption was, "Hope we can always live happily." Victoria smiled and murmured, "Ethan, I hope you're always happy. Just without me for the rest of your life." The end.